Welcome back to Miller's Movers episode 4. Plenty to fit in this week, so we'll get straight into it with a look at the weekend's action that's just been. Down Royal and Wetherby was where most of my attention was held. Down Royal on the Friday, I do think it's worth mentioning the yellow clay. He was put up by myself as a novice hurdler to follow for the season from Ireland. I thought he made a satisfactory debut over hurdles, no better than that. It was over 2 miles, 6.5 furlongs, and I think that played into his jumping, which was a bit awkward at times, particularly when in tight, when they were going quite slow and the revs were low. He looked a bit fiddly and cumbersome. When he was going a bit quicker, particularly in the closing stages, his jumping was good off a positive stride. I'd expect off the back of this them to drop him back into 2 mile for a better grade of race. I mean, he won a very easy race on Friday, as you'd expect him to do it odds on. Thinking a better grade of race where they're going a gear quicker, over a little bit shorter, his jumping will perhaps be more assured, and I was pretty happy with what I saw really on Friday. I think there's plenty to like. It's clearly a classy horse, got some plenty of confidence from that run, and I'm not going to change my mind on him being an Irish hurdler to follow. Also running on the Friday was Brighter Days Ahead. She won very comfortably. The race probably lost a little bit of its complexion with Daddy Longlegs really failing to fire. His jumping was pretty poor from the outset. He never really got involved. He's a horse that I've liked last year. I felt he'd gone slightly under the radar, but I'm very cool on him now. I don't like horses that just fail to turn up from time to time. So he's a horse that I fully expect to win a race or two throughout the season, but he certainly won't be carrying my money in the future. As for Brighter Days Ahead, I think she won, and she won nicely. She made all her running. I think she overcame quick ground and 2 miles. It was the reason I would have perhaps opposed her if Daddy Longlegs had been a slightly better price. But she beat King of Kingsfield, I should say, about 4 lengths. He's a fairly moderate performer, and he often finishes a bit weakly, as I think he did here. She's clearly a smart mare. I was fully expecting to say that they'd go the mare's route, go up in trip, and she'd be better on slightly slower ground. But Gordon Elliott actually said that he wouldn't be surprised to see her in the Champion Hurdle Shake-Up. Well, I've got to disagree with him. I couldn't have her on my mind for the Champion Hurdle. She got beaten at Cheltenham last year in the Mare's Novice over 2 miles, where she seemed to lack tactical speed, so quite where they think she's going to find that speed for going into open company against the likes of Constitution Hill, who should have upwards of £16 to find. State Man should have to find £10. I just don't see that at all. And as we'll come on to later, I think Lossiemouth looks like she's going to have a tilt at the Champion Hurdle. I think that would leave the mare's hurdle route open for Brighter Days Ahead, and I'd be very surprised indeed if that wasn't where she ended up come March at Cheltenham. On Saturday, the action at Down Royal featured around the Champion Chase. Envoy Alain getting back in the winner's enclosure. He's clearly a very effective horse going right-handed. He particularly seems to like quitting up round the bend at Down Royal. Really well ridden by Dara O'Keefe, stepping in obviously for the sideline Rachel Blackmore. And I wouldn't just be so convinced that actually when Rachel Blackmore returns, if indeed she does, that she's going to necessarily jump ahead of him in the pecking order. I think he's really taken this opportunity he's been given with both hands, rode this horse really well. Hewitt, probably a slightly unlucky loser in that Shark Hannah said they put plenty of water down. That perhaps just blunted his speed inside the closing stages, and Envoy Allen got the better of him. But it was a really decent race. The disappointment was Jerry Colomb, the horse I've struggled to warm to. I felt like I was going to have to reassess that this year, but he seemed to get his jumping put under plenty of pressure early on, never really travelled with the same zip. They've said they're going to run tests, but I think he's a horse I'm going to continue to oppose for all that he did shape very promisingly in the Gold Cup last year, and theoretically you would expect him to come back, a little bit stronger, a little bit more effective with his jumping. But he was the disappointment. Envoy Land, really impressed by him. Looks like they're now going to come to the King George and try and atone for that 2022 defeat. At Wetherby, the action was in the West Yorkshire herd, which we won't spend too long on. 4 runners. Katira went off fairly well, backed odds-on favourite. To my mind, she's far too keen through her races to be a 3-mile hurdler, and for all that she tanked through the early part of the race, she made a mistake at the second last, which put paid to her chance. But when you watch it back, the mistake came because they were just starting to quicken down to that hurdle, and I think if you watch it back, as Harry Skelton asked her to go with an effort and quicken down to second last hurdle, the response wasn't immediate, therefore didn't end up finding the stride that he'd hoped to. She landed on top of it. That was her chance over. She's a really smart mare, but for me, she's a 2-mile 4 mare, and I'll look to follow her there, but I would oppose her every time over 3 miles. I think she's just too free through the early part of the race. The race was won by Beacon Edge, probably really well placed by Gordon Elliott to pick up this grade 2, and it turned into a little bit of a dash down over the last. He had a bit more speed than Twig. Now, Twig has been put up to a mark of 143, still £3 below his hurdle, his chasing mark of 146. And I think the long-term aim for this horse is the Grand National. So wouldn't be surprised if they kept him to hurdles till after the Grand National weights are announced to protect that mark of 146. As for a mark of 143, I wonder whether they might go to Haydock for the Betfair Stayers hurdle. A mark of 143, I think, would certainly not prove beyond him. He's a really solid horse, often goes under the radar. Very well ridden by Beau Morgan, so certainly keep Twig on your radar come Haydock if indeed he lines up there. As for the Charlie Hall, frustrating race to watch, really. It became pretty apparent from early in the day. There was plenty of money for the real whacker. They clearly felt he was back on form. They've moved yards after a tough time last year, and he jumped really well under Brian Hughes, made pretty much all the running. Didn't jump beautifully, but he jumped adequately enough, and Brave Man's Game jumped big through the early stages, looked quite gassy. But again, as for last year, he came there looking like he was going to challenge and jumping the second last. The tank seemed to empty. He was pretty gritty, I suppose, in defeat. He stuck on for second, but he just doesn't quite look the horse that he was. He's had a third wind up. He perhaps doesn't fully get a full airful of oxygen now in the closing stages. He's a horse I think you can continue to oppose throughout the season. I did wonder in the immediate aftermath whether they'd drop him back in trip to 2 mile 5 and perhaps look to go the Ryanair route, but actually the sound bites coming out of the Nichols yard afterwards, Harry Cobden and Paul Nichols both saying they might look at the Hennessy, look at some headgear. My concern with the headgear is that he's quite free through the early stages. He tends to jump quite big. Sometimes headgear can send a horse even higher over his fences. That might make him even more inefficient. And he's often looked to me a non-stayer at the Gold Cup trip, which of course the Hennessy is as well. Obviously not quite the same grade, but to my mind, the Hennessy wouldn't look the right answer. The one thing that is worth pointing out is if he takes up his engagement in the Hennessy off a mark of 165, anything rated 151 or lower in that race is going to be racing from outside of the handicap. So that was perhaps the interesting thing. But the form overall, Sam Brown beaten just 5 lengths in third. He's 156 rated. It's certainly not a form line I'm going to get carried away with throughout the season. One of the many conversations I had with friends that enjoy the racing over the weekend was whether I took much heed of yard tours and stable tours. For me, absolutely not. I think they're often full of sound bites that don't mean much, but a friend in particular had watched virtually all of them. So I was sort of curious to go through and have a look, perhaps save you some of the time going through myself and see if there was any nuggets to take out of these stable tours. The 2 I looked at was Willie Mullins in Ireland and Nicky Henderson in the UK. The Willie Mullins one, I mean, kind of reaffirmed what I felt about these really, but I did think there was a couple of interesting points of note. He went through his yard and he mentioned the John Durkan for a number of horses. He's clearly not all going to go there, but Gaelic Warrior, Factor Fire, I Am Maximus, he clearly has a very clear plan in his head as to where he likes to start horses off, and the John Durkan clearly features on that. It'll be interesting to see which of the many horses he mentioned gets sent there. And then the one thing that did stand out for me, and I mentioned it already when referencing Brighter Days Ahead, when talking about Lossiemouth, there was a couple of quotes that direct quotes that stood out. He said he's looking forward to having a crack at the champion hurdle, and that he felt she was going to be a player in the serious player in the champion hurdle. It does seem that perhaps he might well have been told by owners that having won a mare's hurdle, they now want to have a proper cut at Constitution Hill and Stake Man in the champion hurdle. It just did seem unusually sort of firm words from Mullins that there was not maybe or probably. It was sort of a bit more definite than that. So I'd be fairly confident at this stage that if her season goes as planned, Lossiemouth will indeed go towards the champion hurdle, which is particularly why I felt Brighter Days Ahead will end up in the mare's hurdle. Then when talking about Majborough, he referenced that it's difficult for a 4-year-old going chasing, that the allowance isn't quite what it used to be. He did reference whether he perhaps have the speed for the Arkle. Obviously, we know the Turners now becomes a handicap. So very much felt that Majborough will probably win chases, novice chases throughout Ireland, but that maybe he just doesn't expect him to be at the forefront of his novice chase campaign come the spring, but very much thinking that this experience over fences early in his career will stand him in good stead going ahead. In contrast to that, I felt Mystical Power, he was really positive about the size and scope he was starting to grow into. Says he jumps very well. I think he expects him to be a really strong novice chase campaigner. He'd been a bit of a poor jumper early on over his hurdles, but they clearly feel that they've got to the bottom of his jumping, so he might be an interesting one. And then Kopek to boards, this really made me laugh, and I thought it summed up this, and his conversation about Salvatore Monday summed up sort of what you can expect to get from these yard tours. I think he felt that Kopek de Boards was his best bumper horse last season, and he said he's by no risk at all, so he should have plenty of speed. And then immediately followed that up quite amusingly with the fact that he's got plenty of size and scope and looks like a staying chaser. So take your pick as to where he's going to end up. Clearly well regarded, but in terms of trying to form an anti-post opinion, which I think is mad at this time of the year anyway, it was no help whatsoever. And very similarly with Salvatore Monday, his opening line was that he sort of quipped that he only needed one more run to have him qualified for the county. He then said that he'd probably campaign him down the route towards Supreme, but he stays well, so he could look at the Gallaghers. And if you think that if he's qualified for the county and I think he's got the stamina for the Gallaghers, you would then also have to consider both the Coral Cup and the Martin Pipe Conditionals race. So it's enjoyable to watch, but there's just no information that can help you form any real opinion on to where these horses might end up. Then the Nicky Henderson tour I found perhaps a little bit more enlightening than the Mullins. Something I picked up on quite early was that Constitution Hill, they've built him a new stable that means he can come in and out of the stable as he likes, so he can get plenty of fresh air. That, coupled with the fact they've given him a wind up, suggests to me that they were perhaps struggling with his airways all last year, and the sort of infection he got knocked down with after that very poor gallop at Kempton had perhaps was perhaps the tip of an ongoing saga with him. So I think that was quite interesting. I'll be really interested to see how he gallops through the line when he goes to Fighting Fifth, which has been nominated as his starting point. Then there was two horses, Nicky Henderson. I think Willie Mullins you wouldn't want to play poker with. I think Nicky Henderson you'd perhaps have a bit more of a chance. He tends to wear his heart on his face, and he had a bit of a twinkle in his eye when talking about Sergino. Said he's grown into a really nice horse. There was some footage of him. He did look particularly nice. And then Papori, who's a Golden Horn mare, already a listed winner, and he seemed to think that she could yet go on to better things. Something that I found quite interesting was that when talking about John Bon, clearly has a very clear plan for this horse, Schlur Chase, Tingle Creek. He mentioned the fact that they actually take him away for an away day to Newbury, not to gallop, but simply just to walk around the paddock, quite a highly strung horse. And they said he goes to Newbury, walks around the paddock, gets very lit up, but that tends to take the edge off him then when he goes to make his debut. I thought that was quite enlightening as to the attention to detail and the lengths these trainers will go to try and achieve the best for their horses. Another horse mentioned was Under Control, a mare who I really liked last year, but she let me down on a couple of occasions. She was a bit hit and miss. And he referenced that, but didn't really offer any reason that they'd found as to why she was a bit hit and miss. So that for me means that I'll certainly, won't dismiss her, but I'll certainly proceed with caution. And she probably would never be NAP material next year, because if they couldn't find a reason for a sort of in and out performance, then I'm certainly not going to find a reason. Novice chasers look particularly exciting for the Henderson yard this year. I mean, an absolute plethora of horses mentioned: Django Bay, Jinko Blue, Lucky Place, Will Mount, Jericho de Repine, Peaky Boy, Shanna Bob, and more importantly for me, Iberico Lord was confirmed as looking to go chasing. I put him up as a novice chaser to follow, and then was a bit concerned that they hadn't yet made their mind up, but it now seems confirmed that he's going to go that route. But he did seem at pains to sort of bemoan the fact that there weren't beginners chasers and novice chasers to send these horses to, and that he was going to have to pitch horses in off their hurdle handicap mark in chases, potentially against more experienced horses. There's definitely been a cull of novice chases because they don't tend to get many runners. But when you looked at it, I went on the fixture list. There's 10 novice chases throughout November, so there are opportunities. And I would also point out that the Kalahari King run at Uttoxeter last week had 2 runners. That was a novice chase. There's a novice chase today on Tuesday at Warwick, and that's got 3 runners. So it is one of those things that if you don't want to lose them, you do have to use them. But it'd be interesting to see how they divvy those up. It seemed to be that he thought Jingo Bay was his best chance of a novice chase horse this year, but the strength and depth is certainly there, and I'm really keen to see what he can do with Iberico Lord. And then just 2 more horses that sort of got a mention in sort of passing, but often I think with Nicky Henderson, he sort of these ideas pop into his head. Donwave, who's a gentle wave horse, hasn't run yet in the UK. He's 2 from 2 in France at Auteuil. He got a positive mention. And then he was talking about Palladium, the German Derby winner that he's now got. But when talking about him, he referenced the fact that he also had the horse that finished second last in the German Derby, Mina Rashid, but he sort of added, I really quite like that horse. He's an 85 rated flat horse, might be one of those ones that goes slightly under the radar, because it's sort of not going to feature in the main stable tour, but it's certainly a horse that perhaps caught his eye that morning. I don't know. I've put him in my notebook. I would just be keen to see where he pops up. First time out on good ground, over hurdles. And then one final angle I'm going to have with Nicky Henderson this year. He said that he's got 10 horses from Paul Holden. That's the producer they bought John Bond from, out of his point-to-point days. Almery Holden, formerly a licensed trainer, then had a point-to-point academy. It appears that they're sort of slowing down in Ireland. They've sent 10 horses to Nicky Henderson, most of which are for sale. I would just suggest that if you see those ended up in the black and white colours, there might just have been a bit more attention to detail put on their target, and they might just be a little bit more forward than perhaps some of the first-time out ones from the Henderson yard, with a view to the fact that they're on the market. They're going to want to show themselves to best effect. So that's an angle I'll follow, and hopefully it'll pay off. If it doesn't, I might reconsider, but that's an angle that I'm going to take with the Paul Holden, Nicky Henderson horses. Into handicap movers and shakers now, and we'll start with horses going up in the handicap, the first two of which won at Aintree last Sunday. Imperial Saint, he won on chase debut. He's gone up to a mark of 128. It's a rise of £4. But I really liked what he did at Aintree. He made all the running, got out in front, got out in trouble, jumped very soundly. Was in the mix when Move It Like Mini ran out at the last. But he jumped soundly, stayed really well from the back of the last. He's a horse that's got proven form over 2 mile 4, winning at Foss last. And if you take a line of that form literally, it would suggest that actually a mark of 128 isn't beyond him anyway. He'll stay a little bit further over fences. And I think going up in trip can perhaps see him defy the rise of £4 for Philip Hobson-Johnson White. Kamsinas is the other winner from Aintree. He won the 2 mile 4 handicap hurdle. He's now got a rise of rating of 135, a rise of £5. But he travelled beautifully through the race at Aintree, stayed really powerfully. And when you look at the pick of his novice hurdle form from last season, which all came over 2 miles, this rating of 135 probably doesn't look unfair on 2 miles. He clearly stays a little bit further. He might stay even further than 2 mile 4. So a £5 rise. I don't think we'll see Kamsinas finish the season empty-handed. He's certainly a horse that stays firmly on my list of horses to follow. A horse that got a fairly hefty rise is Lo de Sud. Now, he ran over 2 mile 4 furlongs in a handicap chase, a novice handicap chase at Stratford. Won it really easily, as he should do as the class horse. But he's gone up £10 now to a mark of 148, having raced off his hurdle mark of 138. That's almost certainly going to push the Skelton Yard into running him in graded contests now. I think they see him as one of their best novice chase campaigners this year. So graded chases were probably on the cards anyway, but they will just want to see him take a step forward from moving into graded company. I expect him to come back to 2 miles. They said that they went 2 mile 4 because it was simply the right race on the right ground. They wanted to get him started. He's going to need to improve for dropping back to 2 miles over fences. If he does, he's got realistic ambitions of being a graded performer. But if he doesn't, this mark of 148 might just leave him slightly in no man's land with regards to handicaps over fences. And then a horse that I think was probably the standout performance from Ascot for me at the weekend was Martator for Charlie Deutsch, Venetia Williams' first winner of the season. He's gone up £6 to a mark of 140. Didn't win by all that far, but he made quite a bad mistake at the second last. It was the only mistake he made in the race. And I thought it was quite telling of the confidence Charlie Deutsch showed after that mistake. He didn't panic, he gathered him up, nursed him back onto the bridle, jumped the last, and then under hands and heels riding. It was a really nice ride to watch, just quick and clear, one with a little bit in hand. He's 3 from 3 right-handed, but he has one left-handed. He's won over further. This was over 2 miles. He's won over further than 2 miles, and they sort of said that he likes nice ground, but he's won on heavy ground as well. So I think he's got plenty of options going forwards. This would probably be early enough in the season for Venetia Williams to have a horse out and fully tuned. So I fully expect there to be more to come from Martator. Probably the one sore point from Saturday at Ascot for me was watching Chianti Classico. I absolutely loved and rather embarrassingly abandoned for the Sodexo chase. He jumped beautifully under Tom Bellamy, made all the running, which they said wasn't the plan. He's gone up £5 for that win to a mark of 157. He's undoubtedly a better horse on softer ground, so there's every reason to expect that he could perhaps improve beyond that mark. But this mark of 157 now leaves them with some decisions to make. They've referenced that the Grand National is the long-term aim. Running off 157 in the National this year would have given him a lovely racing weight of 11 stone 4. So they've got to decide now, do they try and protect that mark and keep him hidden away until the national weights come out? Or do they go into graded contests and dip their toe and see whether he can find the necessary improvement to mix it with the very best in Grade 2? And I suppose ultimately Grade 1 chases with a view to looking towards the Cheltenham Gold Cup. Personally, if he was mine, I think I'd keep him back, save him for the national. He's a horse that jumps really well, travels very efficiently. I'm sure he's going to stay much further than the 3 miles and the 3 mile 2 that he won the Ultima over last year. I think a mark of 157 and waiting weight of around about 11 stone 4 would look pretty appealing for the Grand National. Horse is going down in the handicap now, and there's a couple in here that I do really like. The first of which is Unexpected Party. He's been dropped £3 to a mark of 146, which I thought was a bit of an overreaction by the handicapper. Last seen, finishing last in the Old Roan Chase, but he was bang there jumping 2 out, only weakened going down to the last. And I would caveat that by saying that when he won the Grand Annual last year, the stewards asked for a reason for the improved performance, and Connection suggested it was the fact that he dropped back in trip to that 2 mile distance. So the fact he's running over 2 mile 4 in the Old Roan, perhaps no surprise that he got a bit tired late on. He's now a few pound above that winning mark from the Grand Annual, but I think he's on a winning mark. I'd be really keen to watch out for him if he pops up in a 2 mile handicap chase. Probably the biggest eye catcher from last week was the Evan Williams trained Can You Call, who had a canter round in the 2 mile 4 handicap chase at Chepstow. He was always closer to last than first, travelled round the home bend with plenty in hand, and as everyone in front of him was pushing towards home, Adam Wedge was still sat very quiet going towards 5 out. He was eventually beaten in the region of 40 lengths. He's got dropped £3 to a mark of 122. Personally, I was surprised that the stewards didn't ask for an explanation as to the running and riding of him. I thought it looked like schooling in public. He's £4 above his last winning mark, but he's £9 below his highest mark. He likes soft ground. I thought this was a really eye-catching run. So Can You Call has got to go into your tracker. Watch out for him. He's very effective on slow ground, around 2 miles, 2 mile 4. He's definitely on our winning handicap mark now. A horse that returned from a long layoff at Wetherby over 2 miles 4 was Midnight River. Jumped very soundly, travelled very nicely, understandably on the return from a layoff, weakened in the closing stages over a trip that would have been far too short of his best, but he's got dropped now £2 down to a mark of 151, and that's crucial. That's the same mark that he won the Premier Handicap Chase at the Aintree Festival off 2 years ago. It's clearly a mark he can win off. He was sent off just 10 to 1 for the Hennessy last year off a mark of 156. He's going to line up there now off a £5 lower mark. He's currently 20 to 1 with SBK. I've seen him far shorter in the market with other bookmakers. I think that 20 to 1 looks a really good piece of value. With anti-post betting, you've always got to sort of take in, is that the likely target? And given they sent him there last year, I think there's every reason that will be his next target. So Midnight River, 20 to 1 off a mark of 151 for the Hennessy, certainly looks to have plenty of appeal on my card. And then to finish with horses going down in the handicap is Flegmatik. He was probably in hindsight a poor selection as my next best at the weekend. He was without his usual headgear. I'd hoped that perhaps earlier in the season that the connections would try to sell a dummy, and that he might have enough enthusiasm in the early stages of the season to not require the headgear, but it became pretty apparent fairly early on that this wasn't going to be his Gold Cup. He's down £2 now to a mark of 137. He travelled very nicely through the Stexo Gold Cup at Ascot, jumped soundly under Tristan Durrell. He's now on his last winning mark. He seems to show his best form going right-handed, probably slightly better at Kempton than he is at Ascot, but wherever he goes next, perhaps with headgear back on, I think Flegmatik has certainly been campaigning to get himself back on a winning handicap mark. And then to finish up with Handicap Movers and Shakers, I've got one non-mover, and that's Premier Ambition. Ran in his first chase in the Kalahari King, like I said, just a 2-runner affair. Finished just a length behind Lookaway, who's rated 137 over hurdles. I see there'd be absolutely no reason whatsoever to suggest that Lookaway didn't run somewhere near that mark. Premier Ambition probably just got a bit outsped in the closing stages. It was 2 miles over fences. He made a slight fiddly mistake at the last, which perhaps didn't help his cause. When you look back through his novice hurdle form, his very best novice hurdle form came at Kelso in the Premier novice hurdle, over 2 miles, 2 furlongs. Beat Django Bay, who's 146 rated. He was getting £5, but he beat him half a length. He stayed really well on that occasion. He's going to stay on his mark of 131 because the rules for novice chasers are that if you're a lower rated horse and you finish behind a higher rated horse who's won the race, you don't get your mark affected provided you've had 4 runs over hurdles, which of course Personal Ambition had. Does mean he's going to get to line up in a handicap off a mark of 131. I think he looks an absolute knockout campaigner in a handicap off 131, so he's gone top of my list into my tracker, underlined in red, in bold capitals. I think because Personal Ambition is a horse that must absolutely be in your tracker next time out in a handicap over 2 miles, preferably maybe a little bit further. And then to finish with this week, I thought I'd have a quick look and draw your attention to the entries for 2 of the Grade 1 3-mile chases, the Betfair Chase and the King George. Perhaps more interesting is who's not entered. So the Betfair have got 18 entries, and perhaps the standout horse missing from that is L'Homme Pressé, who's been a really solid horse, but clearly not seen fully wound up yet, so he's not given an entry. Royal Pagaille from the same yard of Alicia Williams is given an entry. He was last seen when we were in a really big race in the Cotswold Chase when coming down at the last and injuring a shoulder. He's somewhat of a haydock specialist, particularly when juice gets into the ground. Chianti Classico, as I mentioned in Handicap Moves and Shakers, they have given him this entry in a graded contest. It'll be really interesting to see whether he takes it up, and if he does take it up, how he shapes on a track that should play to his strengths. At the moment, Corbett's Cross will be the one that I'm most interested in seeing him come over. I thought he made an eye-catching debut, seasonal return, and Ile Francais is in there with the French connection, but I'd be very surprised if we see him line up. I think they'll keep him back and we won't see him on these shores until the King George. The King George has 20 entries, 8 of which are from Willie Mullins, but perhaps the 2 standouts are the horses that haven't been entered. Most important is Fast or Slow. He'd been highly touted for this race. It seemed that connections were keen to come over, running right-handed on a flat track. I think they felt that that was right up his street. He's not been given an entry. I would suggest that he's met with some sort of setback in training, so it'll be interesting to see where he appears. And the other one that's not been given an entry is Factor File for Willie Mullins. Mullins has got 8 of the entries, including Galopin des Champs. I'd be surprised if he took up the engagement. I'm not sure 3 miles around a sharp right-handed track like Kempton would suit him, but he's been given an entry nonetheless. 2 that I think are interesting from the Mullins yard, Gaelic Warrior and Ilete Tombe, 2 milers, 2 mile 4 horses with a bit of speed, perhaps might stay a little bit further. Gaelic Warrior with the confirmed stamina, he's run over 3 miles over hurdles. He's the horse that I'm most interested by. Price has collapsed in recent weeks, so I'm going to wait until closer to the time to make a firm opinion. But 18 in the Betfair, 20 in the King George, but the most notable absentees are L'Homme Pressé from the Betfair and Fast or Slow from the King George. So that's it for episode 4 of Miller's Movers. Hopefully a comprehensive review of everything that's going on in the racing scene. We do, of course, need a little bit of rain to get proper jumping ground. Fields have been a little bit small. Hopefully that'll come this weekend. And enjoy your punting, enjoy your racing, and I'll be back same time next week.